Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the range of the first half of the 37th Psalm. There are 40 verses in this psalm. We're going to divide it into two for the sake of time, and the theme of this psalm is how to respond to the dichotomy is between the righteous and the wicked, and more specifically, how the righteous are to respond to the wicked, because the presence of wickedness, and even more personally, wicked people, is a fact of life in every and any age. Yet the temptation is to be, when being surrounded by so much negativity, is to succumb to it and allow it to influence you and to shape you. But the message of this psalm is that we can take refuge even when the whole world around us is completely succumbed to wickedness and is lost in all their ways. We can take refuge in the Elohim, who is above us, around us, and within us, in as much as we abide in him. And that is the ultimate recipe for counteracting and coexisting with the presence of wicked people. So the opening verse, the title actually reads, "Of David." David is the author of the psalm. He's identified as such in 73 of the psalms and 37 of the first 41 books, which comprise the first book of Psalms. So the book of Psalms is arranged into 5 books, and one way of thinking of it, in contrast to the Torah or the Pentateuch, is that if the 5 messages of the 5 books of the Torah that were written by Moses are Yahweh's message to man, then the 5 books of the Psalms are man's message to Yahweh, and it is equally inspired by his spirit, as much as any other genre or category of scripture. And so the opening verse reads, "Do not fret because of evildoers. Do not be envious of the workers of unrighteousness." So the presence of evildoers, as we have already mentioned, is omnipresent throughout human history, and sometimes they surround us and overwhelm us. And the temptation we must be vigilant to guard against is to not succumb to envy them, even though they may be prospering at the moment of time. As we read in the next verse, it will not end well for them. So the temporal is temporary. So the wicked, the ones who are wise in the ways of the world, will often prosper at the expense of the vulnerable. And this is the juxt of Asaph's, the 73rd Psalm, when he actually questions the wisdom and purpose of following the straight and narrow when the wicked are seemingly prospering all around him. But he receives the answer that he seeks in the 17th verse when he goes to the temple and finds out their end. And that leads us into the second verse, which reads, "For they soon wither like grass and fade like green plants. So this life is only a vapor, it's only a shadow, then it passes, it's gone in a moment," we read in the book of James. So even though the wicked perpetually prosper in the ways of the world, the wicked people in this present generation, their life is as nothing in the grand scheme of eternity, and eternity is a long time to be wrong. So this life we live is a short time to do wrong, and they will wither like grass. Grass, it comes and goes with the seasonal cycles, and green plants do not last forever, and neither will the wicked, but the righteous will. We will inherit or be offered eternal salvation. "Trust in Yahweh and do good. Dwell on the earth and feed on steadfastness." Now, trust in Yahweh, when we trust in him, he can trust us, and he will assign us tasks in accordance to our responsible response to reading of who he is and knowing what he is like. And the temptation when surrounded by wicked people is to imitate or succumb to their wicked temptations. But the positive formula is always, rather than add to the fire, we can quell the fire with the water of love and good. And we have to dwell on the earth. That's our mortal assignment. In the earth, or at least the world, but which denotes the satanic system which rules the geopolitical balance of power, is a fact we must contend with while on this earth. That is not an excuse to do evil, but we are called to do good and to feed on steadfastness. So steadfastness is our endurance and integrity, our patience, endurance, and integrity in the world in which we live. the Christian life is a marathon, not a sprint. It is a 365 a day a year and 24/7 gigs, so there are no breaks, and this does demand endurance and steadfastness. And delight yourself in Yahweh, and let him give you the desires of your heart. So the word delight is rooted in the Hebrew original, which means to be brought up and pampered. So by that translation, we know that we can be pampered by Yahweh, not comforted, at least in the temporal or worldly sense, although we certainly can, but that is not we have no right or reason to expect to have a more comfortable existence as measured in worldly terms once we embrace the cross and the calling. But if we let him give the desires of our heart, he will honor it, and this brings us to the New Testament and several passages of the gospel in the first epistle of John, whereby we are guaranteed that any prayer offered in his name, he will respond to, and we will receive our request. Now, the name is the controlling element, and it implicitly assumes that we are aligned with the will of that name. So this isn't a blank slate for any fleeting fancy or wicked desire. It is commensurate with the name and the will which belongs to that name. Commit your ways to Yahweh and trust in him, and he does it. So when we are committed to him, he is committed to us, and there is no greater friend or ally who can reward us. And when we trust in him, it's as good as already done. Maybe our needs and provisions and requests will not be immediately accommodated, but eventually they will. So but if we do commit our ways to his ways, and we mimic the way we are called to live, and reflect on his character and try to reflect that in our daily dealings, then everything we could truly need and not necessarily want, but will be fulfilled and honored, and that is an ironclad pledge and guarantee. And he shall bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as midnight. So our righteousness, we are called to be lighthouses and to let our light shine on as a city of the hill. We are to be Christians in public and not confine our righteousness to secret or the dark. We are to give public displays and verifiable witnesses to the world that we are embarked on this calling, and we function as lighthouses in a world that is dark and perverse and wicked, yet we can lead them and provide them with refuge and guidance to a better way than the way of the world. Rest in Yahweh and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man doing wicked devices. Now, rest is an integral component in the Christian life. The Sabbath was made for our sake and not the vice versa, as the Savior makes plain in the Synoptic Gospels with some of his confrontations with legalistic Pharisaical antagonists, but more to the point of the passage. Rest is a counterbalance which enables us to do the work. So even though we are called to endure to the end, we must take periodical intervals where we rest and rejuvenate in order to enable us to perform the work we need to do more effectively in the future. And again, do not fret because of those who prosper. Worldly prosperity is nothing to be jealous of, although the temptation is certainly always present. And more specifically, the man who prospers, who is wicked, and the wicked do have an advantage in the world in the food chain of the socioeconomic order. The wickedness does, if you want to be rich in the ways of the world, I wouldn't recommend this path, but I wouldn't recommend wickedness for the life which lays after this one. Abstain from displeasure and forsake wrath, neither fret only to do evil. So forsake wrath reminds us of the passage in Ephesians, let not the sun go down on our anger. So there is certainly an appropriate occasion for divine and even human wrath. We witness the Savior resorting to wrath at the sight and spectacle of his Father's temple, which was designed to be a house of prayer, turned into a den of iniquity. But in general, we should not harbor hatred or anger in our heart, and we the abstain from displeasure. Now, the asceticism is an erroneous and heretical school of thought whereby spiritual measurement is an accurate measure of spirituality is how much we deny ourselves of some of the basic necessities of life and even the luxuries but some of the things we cannot live without. The aesthetics will keep the food to the bare minimum. We're not necessarily called to that. And do not fret only to do evil. The presence of evil is the source of many fretting, and this is alternately translated as worry, but we need not worry when our faith and trust is in Him. For evildoers are cut off, but those who wait on Yahweh, they shall inherit the earth. So the evildoers are going to meet their end, and when it comes, it's going to be eternal. There's going to be no second chances. They wasted this life pursuing evil and wickedness, and they will be judged accordingly and sent to where they belong, which is hell. But those who are patient with Yahweh and endure this mortal journey that He calls us to, we will inherit the earth. So the earth temporarily belongs to Satan and his minions, but in the final and glorious hour, it will return to the control of its creator and rightful owner, and we will partake in ruling it with Him. Yet a little while, and the wicked one is no more, and you shall look on his place, but it is not. So the wicked people who consume so much of our attention will not last forever, and when they finally expire, it will be an eternal expiration. They will have no body. Their soul will linger in essential solitude, which is hell. And when we look at the one who was causing us so much consternation with the presence of his activity, he will not be there. He's going to vanish, and that means death and hell for him. But the meek ones shall inherit the earth, and delight themselves in the plenty of peace. This reminds us immediately of Matthew 5:5, the Beatitudes in the Sermon of the Mount. The meek are designated the heirs of the earth, and rightly so. Now, meekness is an often misunderstood virtue. It is not weakness, it is power under control. It is the ability to not respond or not retaliate when provoked. That requires a strength and courage that is not immediately intuited by the natural man or the eyes of sight, but it is courage under control. And peace brings us to Matthew 5:9. We are called to be peacemakers, and if we if we are instruments of His peace, we can experience His perfect peace in plenitude and abundance. The wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes his teeth at him. Yahweh laughs at him, for He sees that his day is coming. So the righteous, they have a target sign that the wicked, being rapacious predators by nature, notice. They see someone they can take advantage of and exploit and really make the most out of their vulnerabilities, and they're often hostile and aggressive in their designs towards us. But the one who matters most, they may laugh at us while on this earth, but eventually they're not going to be left around to laugh, and Yahweh's laughing at them the entire time because He knows that their day is short and it is coming, and they will meet His perfect justice. So if we are unjust in this life, we can justice demands that we be confined to eternal torment and punishment. The wicked have drawn the sword and have bent their bow to cause the poor and needy to fall, to slay those who walk straightly. So the weapons are not necessarily always literal weapons, but they are the nefarious designs which are designed to, intended to bring injury to the righteous in any fashion or form. But we can bask in the assurance that no weapon formed against us can prevail, inasmuch as our trust in Yahweh and Elohim remain unshaken and on the sturdy foundation of the ground that He provides in His word and in His will and in His ways. Their sword enters into their own heart, and their bows are broken. He who lives by the sword dies by it. So living by the sword is a poor choice, because eventually and inevitably the sword is going to enter into you. The sword you are not swinging, but that you swung on others, will eventually find its way into your own heart, and the bows that you shoot the arrows from are not going to last. They're going to be utilitarianly useless in the final analysis. Better is the little of the righteous one than the riches of the many wicked. Now, the true measure of wealth, it's been said, is not in the abundance of possessions, but in the fewness of wants. So he who is poor and righteous and humble, the little they have will mean more to them, largely because they are more grateful for what they do have, and they have what they need, whereas the wicked pursue riches to buy the things that money can buy, but they neglect to cultivate the gifts that money can't buy, which are something altogether more precious than that which money can buy. For the arms of the wicked are broken, but Yahweh sustains the righteous. Once more, it does not end well for the wicked. Their arms are going to be broken, but we who faithfully and obediently endure will be sustained, we will be maintained, we will be preserved unto a glorious inheritance in heaven. Yahweh knows the days of the perfect, and their inheritance is forever. Now, strictly speaking, none of us are perfect, at least not in the absolute sense, yet we are called and commanded to be perfect in places such as Matthew 5:48, and inasmuch as we are a better version of ourselves than we were yesterday or yesteryear, we may be said to be in the progress of perfection. And the progress must take place on earth, but it's an investment in heaven, which is permanent and eternal, and our inheritance will last forever. It will be without end. They are not ashamed in a time of evil, and in the days of famine they are satisfied. So even though the presence and the proliferation of evil does not cause them to be ashamed of their own contribution, or even ashamed of their fellow man for indulging and partaking in that which they indulge and partake themselves, but they will be ashamed eternally so for not being shamed at the presence or the reality of sin. And even in the days of famine, they will be, while the rest of the country and the world is starving, they will have the food which they will hoard to themselves. But in being so stingy, they will not. God will not be generous with those who are not generous with their resources. And I don't like to stereotype any socioeconomic class, and I think that the rich are often used as a whipping boy by the lower classes, but we read of in such places as Luke 18 that even the salvation of the rich is possible. So I don't know, I guess it's possible to be surrounded by possessions without having them possess you. So, but I don't like to cast a crude mischaracterization as of all rich people and all poor people as inherently one way or uniformly embodying certain characteristics. There is diversity in all these socioeconomic classes. But the wicked shall perish, and the enemies of Yahweh, like the splendor of meadows, they vanish. So the destiny of the wicked is death, and that unto eternity. And the wicked and the enemies of Yahweh are one and the same. The enemies of Yahweh are those who do not give him homage or tribute. And even though he died for us, he sent his son to die for us while we were yet enemies. We read of in Romans 5:10. And the remarkable thing about Yahweh is, even though the entire world is at war with him, he is not waging war on us. He is ever seeking to extend his outstretched arm to lift us into our heavenly homeland, where he longs for our pleasure, our presence, and our fellowship in intimate proximity with him. And once more, the meadows are a fleeting phenomenon. They do not last forever. They are designed to decay, perish, and vanish in accordance to the laws of nature and in the laws of physics. But in the spiritual laws, those who maintain their integrity, even in the midst of a perverse and fallen generation, can inherit eternal salvation. So I hope that's the reason you're here. I'm glad that you're hopefully getting something out of this, but that's all the time we have for today. We'll pick up on the final 20 verses in this chapter at a later date. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.